Right, we are live.
All right. Welcome everybody to the House Energy and Digital Infrastructure Committee on Thursday, January 23rd. We are here with Sarah Adams of ISO New England and very excited to learn about our regional power grid. So we typically go around the table, introduce ourselves. We ask everybody else in the room to quickly introduce themselves and let us know who they're here representing today. And then we'll turn it over to you and you can identify yourself for the record and take it away. So I'm Representative Kathleen James of Manchester.
Scott Campbell, St. Johnsbury.
Richard Bailey, Lamoille 2.
Chris Morrow, Wyndham, Windsor, Bennington.
Michael Southworth, Caledonia 2.
Christopher Howland, Rutland 4.
Jared Torrey, Washington 2.
Aaron Kleffner, Chittenden 13, Burlington.
Norris Glenn, Wyndham 2.
Jack Locker, Committee Assistant, Williston.
Gabrielle Molina, Downs Rockland and Martin, Government and Public Affairs with ISO New England.
Dylan Zwicky with Atlanta Public Affairs here for Big Mountain Power.
Jonathan Bounds at Renewable Energy Vermont. I do a lot of our research work, so happy to be resourced on the committee in the event again.
Thank you. For the record.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sarah Adams. I'm a senior state policy advisor with ISO New England, and I cover the state of Vermont. So big goal today is to give you all an overview of who the ISO is, why we exist, what we do, but also I just want to make sure that you all know that I have a resource to you. My contact information is in the deck. You all have my business card. If you have questions as you are considering legislation this session, please do not hesitate to reach out. Also, if you ever wanted to come to Holyoke, Massachusetts to take a look at the control room, absolutely, I would be happy to host you so I could help coordinate that.
Consider it done.
Great.
It'd be really cool. Yeah.
All right. So before I get going, can I confirm, do we have a hard stop at 30 minutes or do we have a little bit of?
We do not.
Okay.
Lunch is at noon.
Okay.
So we actually are in pretty good shape. Yeah.
Then I'm happy to keep chatting and keep answering questions as long as we have. So I will just start off with some about the ISO material, and then we can talk a little bit about how the grid has transformed in the last decade or couple of decades and how we think it will continue to transform. Talk a little bit about transmission developments, and then if we have time, we can get into some of our recent studies and some resources that might be helpful to all of you. So the ISO is the Independent System Operator. That is what ISO stands for the New England region. We were established and are regulated by FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, in 1997. Reliability is our #1 priority. We want to make sure that when you flip your light switch 24/7, 365, you have electricity coming to you. And we take that very, very seriously. We are also independent and fuel neutral and technology neutral. We have to be that way under our tariff with FERC. But I'll discuss a little bit that we do work really closely with our states. And even though we don't have an environmental mandate, we are supportive of the state's goals. And we want to make sure that we can maintain reliability as they aim to decarbonize. So what that independence means is that all of our employees, our management team, our independent board are all completely separate from the market participants. You have to disclose if you have any kind of a relationship with a market participant, and we take that very, very seriously. We have 3 critical roles. I already touched on grid operation, but that is first and foremost. Our operators are working very hard every single minute of every single day. They work 12-hour shifts to make sure that we have the electricity that we need. They're balancing demand in real time and making sure that they are on the phone with our neighbors in Canada and New York, with our generators in the region. If we do need to get more resources online or if we need to import more electricity, they are doing that. We also administer the wholesale electricity markets and we plan for the power system. So we're not just thinking about reliability now, we're thinking about reliability 10, 20, 30 years in the future and what we need to make sure that we can maintain that. So that's all our mission. And our vision is really what I had alluded to, where we're working with the states to reliably plan and operate the grid as the region transitions to clean energy, which is being driven by Vermont schools, by 5 of our New England states have very ambitious clean energy deployment and decarbonization goals. So we are tracking that and we are making sure that we are baking those policy assumptions into our planning studies. Before we get going, I do just want to touch on some things that we don't do. We don't handle retail electricity. That's your distribution utility. Wholesale rates do factor into retail electricity rates. And I can explain that a little bit more when we get into some of the market slides. But those rates are set really by the utility and by the state, by the Public Utility Commission in most instances. We don't own any grid infrastructure. We have our headquarters in Holyoke, Massachusetts, and our backup facility in Windsor, Connecticut, and that's it. That's all we own. None of the wires, none of the generation. We don't have a stake in any of those companies that do own infrastructure. And we don't have any jurisdiction over fuel infrastructure. So in New England, we're very dependent on liquefied natural gas. So we do coordinate with gas entities, but we don't really have great visibility or control over their infrastructure. And that is why coordination is so important. Yep.
No, I wanted to just, I'm going to go back to such a basic question, but just to make sure I'm understanding. So you do not own the power grid infrastructure. So across this New England region that falls under your purview, each of those states have a different entity. Like we have Velco that oversees or owns or manages our big transmission lines. Does each state have one of those and you guys play a coordinating role?
Yes. So the analogy that we really like to use is that we're the air traffic controllers. So we don't own the planes. We don't own any of the infrastructure, but we are making sure that the electricity gets to where it needs to go. So in Vermont, Velco owns the wires that you see, and we coordinate with Velco to make sure that we are getting the electricity from point A to point B. In other states, there are a number of transmission owners typically. So utilities like Eversource, National Grid, those are the folks that we're working with, but we don't own the wires. And we are really just making the decisions about where the electricity is going.
Great.
Do grid operators, so I guess Velco is a grid operator, is that correct?
Velco is a transmission owner, and there are distribution utilities in Vermont as well that also are sending power to various folks.
Transmission, okay. Anyway, do those entities have to do what you guys say?
Yes. Yes. And they, in some instances, so if we were ever to get into a situation where we had to call for blackouts, if we ever got into that sort of situation, we never have. But we do leave that sort of thing up to the discretion of the distribution utilities or up to Velco to make the call about whose power is getting shut off. How are they doing that? Because they understand their local systems and where the emergency services are and where the vulnerable communities are. So we do leave that sort of decision making up to our local distribution companies.
Okay.
But if we tell folks you need to send this there, or if we tell, that goes for our market participants as well, if we say you need to produce this much electricity, they're doing that.
They require to do that.
Yes.
For the part of, okay, just curious. Thanks.
Okay, and then the last thing here is that we're not a permit granting authority. So we're not making any siting decisions. We are not deciding where and if generation or transmission can be built. There are a number of entities that provide oversight to the ISO on our critical roles. We do have an independent board of directors. I've already mentioned FERC. Also the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, NERC. We are the reliability coordinator for New England under NERC. And the Northeast Power Coordinating Council also provides some oversight. On the right-hand side of this chart, we have our states. We work with our governor's offices, with the consumer advocates, with the various public utility commissions and other energy boards, policymakers, to make sure that we understand what the state policies are that might impact our role. And vice versa, that folks who are making decisions about energy in the state understand what the ISO is doing, that they know that we are a resource, if they have questions, and that line of communication is open. And then the New England Power Pool or NE Pool also has a number of stakeholder committees that includes folks like generators, transmission owners. So Velco is very active in the NE Pool process. Suppliers and end users typically are represented by the consumer advocates in their respective states. Those committees meet very regularly. We have a markets, reliability, and transmission committee are the three big ones. And there are various subcommittees under those three larger committees where we discuss studies, proposed changes to our tariff, which is our governing document, and also all of the planning procedures that are the rules for reliability and how we operate the power system. We have 9,000 miles of high voltage transmission lines in New England, primarily 115 kilovolts and 345 kilovolts. You can think of the 345s as like I-90 and the 115s as maybe 91. So your state highways versus your big interstate highways. And then the smaller lines that you see in your neighborhood, those are your distribution utilities. So we're not regulating that. That is folks like Green Mountain Power, Burlington Electric, they are operating those smaller lines. We have 13 interconnections to our neighbors in New York and Canada, and we are a net importer of electricity in New England. In 2024, 13% of our electricity needs were met by imports, and that's pretty typical. That's usually the number that we see. We've invested a lot in transmission infrastructure, $12.7 billion since 2002, and with about another $1.4 billion planned through 2028. And we also have developers that are proposing what we call elective transmission upgrades. So these would not be funded by the region as a reliability transmission project. They are privately funded, and they help us do things like connect wind in northern Maine, where there's not a lot of load, to southern New England, where we do have load centers. So we have, I think, 8 of those proposed in our interconnection queue right now that could help interconnect about 10,000 megawatts of renewable projects. So why do we have competitive markets? Why did the ISO exist? Why did we do this restructuring? Yes.
Could I just ask a question? Could you just tell us what an interconnection queue is?
I have some material in the interconnection queue in a few slides, and we will get into it. So these are the 3 primary principles that are underpinning the switch from the more vertically integrated system that we had as a whole in New England and the competitive system that we have now. First is that competition yields prices that accurately reflect a resource's operating costs. Efficiency and transparency encourage innovation and investment in new technologies. And the markets shift the investment risk from consumers to the private developers. So we're moving that risk away from the ratepayers to the folks who are proposing these generation projects. So this is the makeup of our wholesale electricity markets. There are 3 components. The largest component is the energy market itself. So that's shown on the bar chart in teal. This is the largest portion of the market. It also is subject to the most fluctuation because it's very closely tied to fuel costs, specifically to natural gas costs. So you might notice that in years when gas was particularly expensive, we also see higher energy market costs. The forward capacity market is the one area where the ISO actually procures energy on behalf of the region. Currently, that's a 3-year forward-looking market where we are seeing what we think we will need for electricity in 3 years and what's proposed for generator retirements. And we are making sure that we have capacity commitments from generators and also from demand resources who are saying, I can reduce demand to meet the needs that we're projecting. So that's the darker blue. And in years where we've seen a lot of retirements, that's when you tend to see that darker blue portion of the bar be higher. Did we have a question?
I do. So the teal, the energy market, so your slide says there are 550 buyers and sellers in the markets. Buyers are power generators.
No, the sellers are the power generators.
I'm sorry, that's what I meant.
Yes.
That's what I meant. But I'm always going to try to take it back to 101. So the sellers in this market are all the different entities that are actually physically generating power.
Yes.
And they are selling their power into the market to be purchased by
by load serving entities. So that's our utilities are participating. Sometimes a large industrial user will purchase electricity in the markets directly. So those are the types of folks who are buying electricity in the market.
So we have Hydro-Quebec and we have Seabrook and big power generators selling their power into the market, and the GMPs of the world are purchasing that.
Yes, and we also have demand that's participating in the market. So folks who have the ability to reduce demand can also participate in the market, because as far as our operators are concerned, a reduction in demand is the same as someone generating power. If we can reduce demand by 50 megawatts, that's the same as someone producing 50 megawatts. So demand can also fit into these markets.
And the form of that demand is like energy efficiency?
Sometimes it's energy efficiency. Sometimes it's
Storage.
not storage. Sometimes it's like when we get towards the peak, we're going to take certain things offline. So that's the sort of demand response that would be getting into the markets. Okay.
Are we going to get into forward capacity, or are we just going to?
That's the market.
We can chat about word capacity.
Yeah.
I did not include a lot about the FCM because we are currently in the process of changing the way that we do that market.
And that might also be more of a sophomore year.
Yeah, the markets are typically, I will tell you, when we do trainings for our market participants, we typically start with an ISO 101 and then you move on to the markets training.
Great, let's put the proverbial pin.
Okay, if we have time, I'm happy to discuss some of the changes that we're thinking through for the capacity market.
So, Sarah, you had talked before about the possibility of us visiting the ISO, and when I have done it in the past, I think I did it with Rev Campbell. We actually took a class, I think, right?
It's an all day thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if that's something that is offered this year or next
We
year.
we host an ISO 101 for government officials, which you all would be qualified to take, typically in the October timeframe. I'm not sure if we have released the dates for that, but I would be happy to provide that information when it becomes available. That is certainly something that you would all be eligible to do. And that does include, we typically do a control room tour as part of that.
That would be a really neat opportunity for any of our committee members. So if you could just make sure that we all have the chance to apply, or however it is that we are.
Absolutely.
So we can write our application essays.
Okay,
onward. Thank you.
All right, so then the last portion of the market is, you can see the little orange sliver. This is our ancillary services market. It's 182 million compared to the billions that we see in the other markets. So it's a very small percentage, but these are things like voltage services and flat start. So it's a small part of the market, but those types of services are really important in times when the grid is stressed or in times of high demand. Those are the types of things that we need. And I did just really want to underscore how closely the energy market costs are tied to the cost of gas. So this just shows how those really dovetail. When gas prices spike, so do energy costs.
So in Vermont, with our renewable energy standard, and which I think then results in our utilities doing a lot of longer term power purchasing agreements. So what you're showing us here is for when the utilities have to buy on the spot market. Is that what the right terminology is?
Yeah. So what Rep. Sibilia is referencing is there are two components to our markets. We have the day ahead market, which load serving entities tend to participate in because it removes some of the volatility involved with the real time market, which is also referred to as the spot market. So you can lock in typically a lower price based on what we're forecasting the demand to be the following day if you participate in the day ahead. And then our operators are using that real-time spot market to balance the difference between that day ahead forecast. If it's hotter or colder, if we have unexpected generator outages and we need more energy, that's when we get to the real-time market, and those prices tend to be higher than what we've seen in the day ahead. So this is This is for folks who are participating in those wholesale markets, who are bidding in either in the day ahead or the real time. They would be impacted by the cost of gas because that is such a big part of the energy cost that we see.
And who would be the right entity to explain to us the differences in exposure to that kind of spot market? Would it be between us and our neighbors? Would that be you? Would it be the Department of Public Service?
I guess exposure to risk for who? Because it's the
Ratepayers.
for ratepayers.
right.
Okay. Yes. So for ratepayers, there's a retail component involved in that as well. So the ISO is part of that, but the wholesale electricity costs are such a small part of the electricity bill that your average ratepayer receives. And actually, I did jot it down. I have the exact number. If our revenue requirement was passed through to ratepayers, it would be $171 per month. So about $20 a year. So that's, I think, a pretty small portion of most folks' electric bills. So I think the PUC might be able to weigh in kind of on how the retail rates are calculated. They do have to approve those. I think that they might be the right entity to talk through that.
And I think we're starting to see some increases in natural gas prices again. So I think it just might be helpful information for us as we're now having our utilities come in to ask them to kind of talk to us about what their exposure is to that and explain. Because I think it's less than a lot of other states because of our regulatory framework, but it would be good for us to understand.
Yeah, and I will say Vermont's retail rates are less than what we see in some of our other states. When we kind of look at that, when the PUC set their rates every year, Vermont does tend to have less fluctuation than our other states do.
Or lower and less volatile.
Yes, lower and less volatile.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right, so that is my quick about the ISO overview slide. So if there's anything else, any other questions you all want to ask kind of on the ISO 101, I'm going to get a little bit more into what the grid looks like. Okay. So currently, New England is a summer peaking system. We used to be winter peaking in the 90s around the advent of air conditioning, but we have been a summer peaking system for quite some time. However, as heating and transportation electrifies more and more, we expect that we will switch back to winter peaking. And I will just note that this is New England wide. I know that there are parts of Vermont, I understand, that are already winter peaking. So this is, as a region, we think that we will shift to a winter peak in about the 2035 timeframe. So that's a big paradigm shift, and that's something that our operators and our planners are like really thinking about. I just wanted to highlight the goals that we are thinking about with regards to emissions reductions and renewable energy deployment. 5 of our states have very ambitious goals, and we do consider all of these types of goals and policies in our planning. Just looking at the renewable portfolio standards or renewable energy standard that you all have here in Vermont, the goals just depicted a different way here. And now, so this shows total system capacity in 2000 compared to 2023, which is the last full year of data that I have. And 2000 is the first full year of wholesale markets data. So that's the earliest time frame that I can show you. Oil and coal used to be nearly half of the available capacity that we had in New England. Now we're down to about 22%. Natural gas is most of our capacity. If we think about actual electric energy production, virtually no oil and coal. In 2024, less than 0.5% between the two of them, compared to, I'll just underscore the difference between capacity and energy. So we have 22% of our capacity comes from oil and coal, only 0.5% of our actual production. So you can think about capacity as like your speedometer. You could go 120 miles per hour. You are not doing that. Typically, you're going 30 miles per hour. So that's the energy production. So it's what we could do versus what we are actually doing. And most of our electricity production is coming from natural gas. actually our gas production, our gas capacity are quite consistent. We also have about a quarter of our production coming from nuclear. Hydro, imports, and renewables make up a little more than a quarter as well. And imports is predominantly hydro that's coming from Eastern Canada. So that is largely renewable, what we are seeing there. The third time frame that you see on this chart is from our future grid reliability study. And this study looked at what we would need to see as far as electricity production in order for our state to meet their decarbonization goals. So looking at 2040, we would need to be nearly 60% renewable. That's a really big jump from where we are. I think we were 12%. I'm sorry, I can't see with the little videos here. 12% in 2024. So we've got a ways to go in the next couple of decades. But the optimistic read is that we've already made that magnitude of a shift away from oil and coal. So it is doable, but it is going to take a lot of different folks working together, the states, the utilities, the permit granting authorities at the local level as well, to make that shift.
And this is region wide. This is not Vermont specific.
That's right. So this is for all of New England.
Scott and
So I was going to ask how Vermont's requirement to build more in-state renewable affects ISO, affects the whole region and affects this.
Yeah, so that is something, a big part of my role is making sure that our system planners know about what Vermont's policies are. So they get an update from me every session whenever there is a new bill passed that I think will impact what happens on the grid. And that gets rolled into our planning studies. So every May we release our capacity, energy, loads, and transmission report. And there are certain assumptions that are included in that report for each state based on what their policies are. And we also work not just with my team to understand the policy, but also with the utilities to talk about actual deployment rates and what their programs are. So we're including all of those assumptions that we think this amount of renewables will be built in Vermont. Some of those will be behind the meter, so we won't see them, but we'll see them as a reduction in demand. Some of those will be grid connected, so we'll plan for those when they're at a certain point in their development timeline.
So it's just another planning factor. It's
Yep.
It's not a serious issue.
oh, sorry, Representative Morales.
240. So the migration from oil and coal to natural gas was just due to market pricing, mostly.
Largely due to market pricing. Also, natural gas is much lower emitting than oil and coal, so there was a big push in New England to make that shift.
And so I'm curious about the hydro in 2040, why that decreases.
So it's not necessarily decreasing, and I usually note this, so thank you for asking this question. It might just be a smaller slice of the overall pie. So we're not necessarily saying the hydro will come offline. It might just be that we have all these new renewables that are coming online. So hydro is a smaller portion of the amount of generation that we are using.
So you're
Same with nuclear in that regard.
you're projecting a dramatic increase in electricity use between now and 2040.
Yes. And I have some slides showing what that looks like as well.
Thank you.
Morrow, got one of my questions, which is, are you looking at the AI needs? Does this take into account the AI projections that we're seeing?
Yeah, we are paying attention to things like AI and data centers, but we're not seeing as much of an impact in New England as some other regions are. As we see the impacts happening more, if we see like data centers proposed in the region, then that will certainly be things that we bake into the planning studies as well. But we haven't really seen that coming to our area just yet.
And renewables, does that include battery or storage?
Yes, renewables does include storage. And I can show you all of what we're seeing as far as proposals for storage in a couple of slides.
And in terms of nuclear, does that account for any new or increased nuclear facilities in our region?
This 13% really just assumes that we're keeping the nuclear that we have. As we see projects get to a certain point in commercial viability, we do start to include them in our planning studies. But we need to feel pretty confident that that is a project or a transmission line, whatever it is, that is actually going to happen before we're going to include it in a planning study. So if small modular reactors get to the point where we're seeing them proposed and they feel very viable, then they will be something that gets included in planning studies, and we will expect that we will have them.
Thank you.
Okay.
So we've already really talked through this, but just to underscore that most of our electricity generation is coming from low or no emitting resources. And that has really driven down what we see as far as generator emissions in the region. The line graph here shows from 2010 to 2023. And the figures on the bottom are actually from 2000 to 2023. So in the last 2 decades, we've seen reductions in carbon dioxide emissions of about 40%, nitrogen oxide emissions 63%, and we are down 98% in sulfur dioxide emissions from 2000. And that is really due to state policies. So this is where we're going to chat about the interconnection request queue. This is one of the ways that the ISO executes our role as the system planner. So any resource that wants to interconnect to the bulk transmission system, whether that is new transmission or generation, has to submit a proposal to the interconnection request queue. And what we do, we are not saying yay or nay on these projects. We are saying, yes, you can interconnect reliably at this location, or no, you can't. And here's what you would need to do as far as transmission infrastructure upgrades in order to interconnect here. So this is what we are seeing in our queue currently as of this month. We have about 40,000 megawatts for the proposals, mostly battery storage. 47% of the queue is battery storage, and that is just standalone batteries. There are some more batteries that are coupled with solar or wind that go into those solar and wind buckets. Battery storage was nowhere on the chart in 2017. If you look at that smaller donut chart, wind has been pretty consistent, but most of what we were seeing in 2017 was natural gas.
So we can get orders of magnitude down in our heads. We have 38 megawatts, 38,000 megawatts. What is Vermont use?
I have that number for you. It's 344 megawatts that's proposed in Vermont, and that is mostly batteries.
I actually, my question, how much do we use, not what's proposed, I'm just trying to get my scale of Vermont compared to your New England wide numbers.
What do you use as far as what is Vermont's load?
Right.
I don't know the number, but I know that Vermont is about 4% of the annual load. That's spread across New England.
Okay, so,
This,
and then
so what we're looking at, yeah.
Mhm.
I think what we're looking at here are proposed projects
That's right.
in 2017 and 2025.
That's right.
Which is not actually the composition on the.
right.
That's right. And I will say there is a large amount of attrition in the queue typically. And I'll actually I have another slide that just shows what the proposed in-service date for all of those proposals is. And the other data point that I wanted to highlight here is that the ISO has studied and issued interconnection agreements for more than a quarter of those projects, and they are not commercially viable for a number of reasons. So it could be that they're having supply chain issues, that they don't have their permits. So there are a lot of reasons why these projects don't necessarily get built.
That's another question.
Yeah.
So wind that you have here, how susceptible is that to federal changes in
So
direction?
I did look up the answer that I am supposed to give on this is that we, as the ISO, are really a creature of state policy more so than federal policy when it comes to a lot of these things. We have 6.5 gigawatts of wind projects in New England that already have their leases and their permits. So our understanding is that those projects are completely unaffected by the recent executive order. Certainly, any new projects might be in trouble, but we have a lot of wind that is already under construction in New England that we think should be able to come online.
Is that what we're seeing here? Is all of that wind that has its leases, or is some of that proposed?
Some of this wind would not have these agreements. So some of this would be affected by that executive order. The other thing I will note just about the queue, I think this one's a little easier to look at, so I'll go back, is that we're also undergoing some changes to how we administer our queue under FERC Order 2023. Right now, it is a serial first come, first served queue. So of this 40,000 megawatts, there's a lot of duplicative projects in here because developers will put in speculative proposals to see where they can interconnect the cheapest or where they might get the best deal on a lease. So oftentimes we'll see a project in the queue 3 or 5 times and it's the same project. So obviously not all of those get built. Many will drop out. We're moving towards all of the ISOs and regional transmission organizations in the country per this FERC order are moving towards a first served queue. So we expect that we will see a smaller overall number of proposals because there will be certain site control requirements, there will be certain financial surety requirements that just don't exist right now. So we will probably see far less proposed in the queue, but they will be more viable, more likely to actually be constructed projects. So we wouldn't see projects coming into the queue that didn't have a lease agreement under that new FERC order.
Sorry.
That's
I'm
okay.
sorry.
Yeah, no need to be sorry. Sarah, I know you are here visiting from away, and we have you for 15 to 20 more minutes. So please help me help you. No, I just mean let's make sure that we hit the slides that we feel are most important. I'm learning. We are the committee of questions, so please feel free to skip us ahead to make sure that we have a chance to hit the things that you think are most important. We can, by noon, we probably should wrap.
Okay, great. I'll go through this one really quickly. We do look at the types of things that reduce demand in addition to the types of things that increase demand. So we are considering energy efficiency and behind the meter solar, so things like someone has solar on the rooftop that powers their house, but it's not connected to the bulk transmission system. We see that as a reduction. So these factors in 2024 decreased peak demand by about 11%. Out to 2033, we think that they will reduce peak demand by about that same magnitude, by slightly higher. So we definitely track that. If we're not aware of these things and baking them into our forecast, then we are procuring more energy in the day ahead market than we need. And that is just not efficient for the region. So we do need to account for these factors. Just to underscore, we have a lot of solar in New England. We've gone from 40 megawatts in 2010 up to 6,500 megawatts at the end of 2023. And we expect that number to approximately double again by 2033. So we don't think solar development is going to slow down, and we are going to keep paying attention to this. And this is precisely why. This is what we call the depth curve. You can see that yellow area. That is the grid demand reduction that we attribute to behind the meter solar projects. So we don't see that as energy generation. Our operators just see that as a decrease in demand. Yep. The dotted line is where we would expect the demand curve to be if it were not for all of those behind the meter projects. So in New England, there on a sunny day, demand is higher at 4 in the morning than it is midday. So we really have to pay attention to that. We are really closely tracking the weather to make sure that we know what we think the solar in the region will be doing. And we know that we're not going to need a lot of electricity midday on a sunny day. And then the demand comes back up as the sun goes down.
And all of our solar goes.
Yep. So this is where we get into thinking about what energy use is going to look like as we electrify. We've seen a decrease in net energy use over the past couple of decades as a result of things like solar and energy efficiency. But as heating and electrification or in transportation electrify, we are going to see demand really come up quite a bit. And this is something that we haven't really seen in quite some time. So we're certainly thinking about how we are going to support that and maintain reliability. So we're looking in 2024, we're going to go from just shy of 120,000 gigawatt hours up to 140 gigawatt hours in 2033, which is about a 17% increase. So looking out to 2033, we are expecting that the impact of electrification is going to be about 17% on annual energy use. The impact on summer peak is about 9%, and the impact on winter peak is 26%. So that is because of heating and also because transportation infrastructure, the chargers, the batteries are not as efficient in the cold weather. So transportation electrification does impact winter peak a little bit more as well.
Transmission and distribution grids will handle that increase.
Yes, and I'm going to talk about how we think we can do that and what some of the solutions are, what some of the give and take around that is. Something that we just started looking at in our 2024 capacity, energy, loads, and transmission report was managed versus unmanaged EV charging. So this is something that a lot of our utilities in the region have managed EV charging incentive programs. In this first year, there were 2 Vermont utilities that were included in that. It was, I think, GMP and Burlington Electric had managed charging programs. So these types of programs incentivize folks to charge overnight or during the day, not during those peak hours of 3 to 7 p.m. when everyone is coming home from work and plugging everything in. And you can see the purple line shows what unmanaged EV charging would look like, and the green line shows what managed charging would look like. So if we can keep the EV charging down to 0 during the peak hours, that is really going to help us manage getting over that peak. And that just makes our operators' lives a lot easier. So we were pretty conservative with adoption rates in this first go around. But as more utilities adopt these types of programs and as they have data on adoption rates, then we will update our forecast accordingly. So, yes.
So you have all the data on adoption rates.
We work in developing this forecast and developing all of our electrification forecasts. We're in touch with the utilities and they are giving us data on what they see as far as who's actually enrolled in this program, who is actually utilizing this program. So we do get that data directly from the utility.
And is it public?
The minute utility to utility data is not public, but we do publish the different components of the cell. So the transportation electrification forecast gets published and there would be like an aggregate Vermont number for the assumptions. So there are state by state numbers, but there aren't utility by utility numbers. So these are the 4 pillars that we as the grid operator think we need to support a reliable clean energy transition. We obviously need a lot more clean energy. We have to go from 12% up to nearly 60% by the 2040 timeframe. We need balancing resources. So this could be demand reduction. This could also be, resources that can supply electricity in the times when the wind is not blowing and the sun is not shining. We're moving towards more intermittent sources of generation. Energy adequacy, this is a big one in New England. We're very dependent on liquefied natural gas right now. So a dependable energy supply chain or a robust energy reserve is really necessary. And that can be long duration storage once we have that technology. But we don't really have a viable long duration storage solution just yet. And then last is robust transmission. We are going to need more transmission or uprated transmission to support interconnecting all of these new renewables and also to support the increase in net energy use that we are anticipating.
Quickly, and then because I really want to let Sarah get through some slides.
Okay, well, I'm just wondering about the role of ISO in New England in fostering these developments, not just reacting to what the market actors are doing, but actually, in somehow fostering. You can answer that later. We can move on.
Yeah, I will just say that we really rely on the markets to do that. So the market sends signals to folks that we need these
Yeah.
resources. We'll pay you handily for these resources because we need them in the region. So we're relying on the market to send those signals for what we need. I will kind of skim through a lot of these transmission slides, but we do every 2 years as part of our role as the system planner, we issue a regional system plan. This is a public process. This is an RSP year, 2025, so we will be updating that document. And that is a 10-year forward-looking long-range plan about what we think we really need as far as transmission to support the electricity needs in New England. We've already talked to these numbers, so I can skip this, but this is just a breakdown of how that investment has happened and how what proposed projects we have as far as transmission infrastructure. And then for anything that is deemed a reliability project in New England necessary to maintain grid reliability, those costs get spread across the states, and that is based on load share. So Massachusetts and Connecticut have the lion's share of the load in New England. They pay the lion's share of the cost for a regional transmission project. And Vermont has just 4% of the load. So Vermont pays just 4% of the cost for a transmission project that we have deemed necessary for regional reliability. Transmission has benefits just beyond reliability, though. The transmission investment that we have made has really reduced or eliminated out of market costs. So we used to have a lot more reliability agreements with certain generators. We really don't have to do that very often anymore. There have been only a handful of cases in recent years where we've had to have a reliability or like a resource must run agreement with a generator. The markets are also more competitive because we've eased transmission constraints. So we can truly pick the lowest cost megawatt as opposed to the lowest cost megawatt that doesn't have some kind of a transmission constraint stopping it from getting to where it needs to go. And then the transmission upgrades also facilitate resource transformation. So as we think about interconnecting all of these new renewables, we need reliable transmission to do that. We have made substantial investments. We expect that there will be a lot more investment needed. This is a figure from a Massachusetts decarbonization study. $620 million to $1 billion in transmission reliability investment is estimated each year through 2050 to support the clean energy transition. And that will not all be reliability projects. That won't all be infrastructure that is funded by the states. I mentioned that we have electric transmission upgrades, and this is just currently we have 8 proposed that could move 10,000 megawatts of clean energy from northern New England down to southern New England where there is more load. And I've just included here a bunch of links to recent planning studies that we've undertaken. We have longer looking transmission studies at the request of the states than what we are required to do, which is 10 years, but we recently did our first longer term transmission study that looked up to 2050. And we are now in phase 2 of that effort, which involves the states telling us their transmission need that they would like us to help solve, and we will issue an RFP on behalf of the states to procure a transmission solution. So there's some really interesting and very collaborative work between the ISO and the states going on right now around longer term transmission planning. We're also thinking more and more about extreme weather and how that impacts our planning and our operation of the grid. So we've done the operational impacts of extreme weather events. And we created a really innovative model called the probabilistic energy adequacy tool that helps us really think about, well, what happens if we have a crazy, like a really long cold stretch? And we, for the first year this year, used that in our winter energy analysis that went out. We looked at 4 different events using that tool. 2 were longer term, very cold stretches, longer term, 2 were shorter term. We modeled each of those extreme events, and these are all historic events that have actually occurred 720 times, all with different factors of fuel replenishment for generators or generator outages that might happen, and averaged those and said, okay, if these big, crazy extreme events happen, are we still okay for this winter? And the answer was yes. So that's a new tool that we can use to plan. And then we have a number of other studies here, most of these looking at supporting a future grid with more renewables. I just have some resources to go through with you all, but if you don't get through them, you have them in your slide deck. The Consumer Liaison Group is a public free forum. This is the one area where the ISO really interacts directly with ratepayers. And these meetings are all hosted in hybrid formats. So you can come in person, you can join on WebEx, if the in-person location doesn't really work. So we have our anticipated 2025 meeting dates. These have all been posted to the CLG webpage on the ISO website as well. We have a great glossary on our website. If you're ever wondering what an acronym means or what a term means, this is a very good resource, I think. And we also have a number of publications that we update every year. We are working on the update for the regional and the state profiles right now, so those will be posted shortly. We also have our regional electricity outlook webpage that gets updated every year. These provide a good snapshot of what we are seeing on the grid. And then we have a really great app. I know that Repsilia likes the app. If you are interested in seeing what wholesale electricity prices are in real time or what the resource mix is in real time, you can see all of that information in the app. And my contact information is here as well.
John?
Wow, that was great. I believe we have 3 questions. So Rep. Kleffner, Rep. Sibilia, I've got a question and thank you. Yes.
In a previous role, I heard a bunch of testimony about Burlington's McNeil Power Station and its 250,000 or so megawatt hours a year that it produces. And there was contradictory testimony, and I wonder if you will weigh in on this. There was testimony that said that Northwest Vermont's the reliability of the electric supply there depends on that plant. And there was other testimony that said it's so small compared to ISO's capacity that if we took it offline, it would have no effect on reliability in Northwest Vermont. And I can't make head or tail of that without someone who knows what she's talking about.
Yeah, I can't opine specifically. I'm not terribly familiar with the Vermont transmission system. That might be a great question for Belco if you haven't heard from Belco yet. But I think that what it sounds like to me is that there are transmission constraints in that area. So perhaps no, Rexabilia is shaking her head. That's the only reason that I could take is that you want generation located near where it's needed if there are transmission constraints. And if that's not the case, then I'm not sure why that particular generator would be needed for reliability.
Thank you.
Sibilia?
Yeah, that's a big conflict point. I'm sure we'll hear from BED tomorrow on that. But my question was, who do you interact with from the state of Vermont and when?
Yeah, so I interact with the Public Utility Commission. I present to the Vermont System Planning Committee every quarterly meeting. They get a regional update from me. So I'm in the state for those meetings generally, which all of the utilities typically come to that. A lot of the planning authorities come to that meeting. So that's a really good stakeholder body that I'm in regular contact with. The Department of Public Service.
Who gives you like feedback about like what Vermont needs?
We hear a lot from the PUC on that. And I do also, in addition to interacting with the PUC myself, I facilitate a meeting between the commissioners and our board of directors every year. So they are up here meeting with the PUC, hearing about what they need and what they think the big issues in the state are. So they are taking that back directly as well.
Kind of a similar question. So Vermont's grid connects to New England, connects to the rest of the United States, connects to Canada. So the grid is a very interconnected thing. How do you coordinate with like the other ISOs?
Yeah, our operators are constantly on the phone with New York and Canada. If we need electricity, if they need electricity. So there is a constant line of communication open. They can see how our neighboring systems are doing. We have big, if you've ever seen the control room, we have big wall boards where they can see how our neighbors are doing. So they have a sense of, is the phone about to ring and it's New York telling us that they need some power from us. So that's kind of the purpose of the real-time market, the spot market, is that it balances those fluctuations in demand. We're really only in contact directly with those folks that we have interconnections with, but they obviously are in contact with their neighbors. So there's kind of a trickle down effect.
How many are there across the United States?
ISOs and RTOs, there are 9. So it's, and many of them are multi-state like us. Some of them are single. California is their own, Texas is their own, and ERCOT. And there are some kind of unincorporated areas, but there are 9 ISOs and RTOs.
Hello. Thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. And I'm sure we will be in touch. If we needed further testimony at any point, could you join us on Zoom?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. All right. I
Thank you.
think